Hello, and welcome back to The World According to Reese. It's been a couple of weeks since I made my last video, where I talked about growing up blind and some of the sensory challenges I experienced at school. That video focused more on what things felt like from my point of view. In this video, I want to take a slightly different approach and talk practically about what actually makes a classroom accessible for blind students and how small changes can make a big difference. This isn't about criticizing schools or teachers. It's about understanding that accessibility is often about awareness, consistency, and communication. Firstly, I'd like to talk about the importance of clear verbal information. One of the biggest barriers in a classroom is when important information is only given visually. For example, if something is written on the board and the teacher says, as you can see here, a blind student immediately loses access to that information. Simply reading out what's written, describing diagrams briefly, or explaining visual content verbally makes a huge difference. It doesn't need to be complicated. Even small things like saying, I'm writing 3 bullet points on the board, gives context. Clear verbal explanation turns a visual classroom into an accessible one. Secondly, I feel I should discuss the importance of accessible materials. Providing materials in accessible formats is another key part of classroom accessibility. That might mean things like digital documents instead of paper handouts, screen reader compatible files, allowing early access to materials so they can be converted if needed. If a blind student has to wait for materials to be adapted, they start behind everyone else. This is most frustrating, as it means the blind student often finds themselves playing catch up when it is most definitely not their fault. Accessibility isn't about giving an advantage, it's about removing delays and barriers. I also want to stress the importance of consistent layout and predictability. Consistency is extremely important. If a blind student has a designated seat, a laptop position, or specific equipment, keeping those things in the same place every time matters. If chairs, desks, or equipment are constantly moved without warning, it can make the environment harder to navigate. Predictability is what creates true independence. When someone knows exactly where their seat, laptop, or materials are, they don't need to ask for help. They can just get on with learning. Clear routes in classrooms and buildings. Another major factor is keeping routes clear. This applies in all areas, including classrooms, corridors, playgrounds, and in and around other shared spaces within school premises. Bags left on the floor, chairs sticking out, or equipment placed in walkways can create unnecessary obstacles. Blind students rely heavily on memory and mental mapping of their environment. When routes are predictable and clear, movement becomes confident and efficient. When they're cluttered or constantly changing, movement becomes stressful. Accessibility in schools isn't just about inside the classroom, it's about the whole building. Noise and sensory awareness. Noise levels also matter. As I mentioned in my previous video, sound can be much more intense when you rely on it for information. Sudden loud sounds, chaotic transitions, or unpredictable noise can be overwhelming. Simple adjustments, such as clear transition warnings, predictable routines, and avoiding sudden surprises, can reduce anxiety significantly. It's not about making a classroom silent, it's about making it manageable. Finally, I'd like to talk about the idea of high expectations and not pity. One of the most important aspects of accessibility is attitude. Blind students don't need pity, and they don't need lowered expectations either. Instead, they need access, opportunity, clear communication, and belief in their capability. With the right support and accessible environment, blind students can achieve just as much as anyone else. I wanted to make this video because accessibility in schools doesn't have to be complicated. Often, it's about awareness and consistency rather than expensive equipment. If you haven't seen my previous video about growing up blind and sensory challenges, I'll link it in the description, as it gives more context to some of the experiences I've mentioned here. If you found this video helpful, please consider subscribing to the channel if you can, and hit the notification bell so you don't miss future videos. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.